did you get into the wild world of critiquing? You've been doing this for some time.
Yes.
What was the interest?
Well, back in the 1970s, when I first started as a teacher, I taught for 35 years, including 32 at Maple Grove on the other side of the lake. And I would find that very, very often my students could name every batting average in the National League, but they couldn't tell me what I had just taught them.
Well, okay.
And so I would sit down with them and I'd say, now this is important to me, tell me about this. And what it amounted to was they didn't think it mattered. They didn't think that anything they learned in school mattered. And they would say, well, you know, you win a football game, you get your picture in the paper, but if you get an A on a test, nobody cares. And parents commonly would come to parent night and they'd say, well, I don't care whether he learns anything or not, as long as he's not a problem. And, you know. And the Post-Journal that I write for has never been a friend of public education. They say some pretty nasty things about it. And I took to phoning them and telling them, don't you understand you're part of the problem? You're teaching kids that learning doesn't matter. You don't publish anything about learning. And a fellow named Bill Flynn, who is now with the Buffalo News, was the region editor at the time. And Bill said, look, it pays about $8 an article. Do you want to do it, or do you want to stop calling us once a week? So I thought, oh, put up or shut up. So I said, okay, I'll do it. And that was almost 30 years ago, and I'm still doing it.
What's your background? Are you from the area, Bob?
No, I was born in Pittsburgh and grew up in that area. Went to Butler High School, and then I went to Allegheny College. Greg and I were...
Very fine institution.
Excellent. Turns out the best.
Were you an English major there?
No, I was a history major.
Jay Louvas?
Oh, yes. Jay was an American history specialist, so I only had him twice, but...
I'm going to digress here for a second. Excuse us, folks, while I didn't know all this stuff. Did you take Graham Bird? Did you take Drama 101?
I did, but not from Bill Walton.
Okay.
Graham Gloucester Bird is a slick chick. I remember people saying that all the time.
Yeah. So what was your time? When did you graduate from Allegheny?
70.
70. And then from there you went where?
From there, I stayed at Allegheny and got my master's. And then I taught in Cleveland for 2 years. And then I was hired at Maple Grove. And I've been there until 2003 when I retired. And I'm on the faculty at Mercyhurst in Erie and at JCC. But I haven't taught at JCC for quite a while.
What drove you to teaching?
I've always wanted to do it. I love learning. I love communicating. I felt it was a way, you know, back in the 60s we all had to matter. It was a way to matter, and never regretted it.
You're a history major.
My master's is in English.
Master's in English, so you did a little bit of a flip from what you're currently doing in the arts and entertainment and education, going from Paul Knight's class to Skipper Knight's. You must have had Skipper.
Yes.
To where you are today. There had to be some point, an aha moment that said, gee, this is what I really would like to do.
Well, I think that culture is one of the most important elements of history. And I've always, 12 years of piano lessons, 4 years of pipe organ, 4 years of voice. I was very much an active actor in Pittsburgh I did 3 operas at Allegheny, right north. So the arts, I mean, life isn't life without the arts.
Chautauqua Institution. At some
Yes.
point, guy from Pittsburgh who gets his education in Meadville, Pennsylvania, finds 2 years worth of Cleveland. In that time slot, did Chautauqua mean anything to you?
Yeah, my best buddy in high school was Rob McKee, and I don't know if you know Robert and Wilma McKee. They are his parents. They have a place here near the children's school, and we used to come up in the summer and stay at their place. And so I've known Chautauqua for a very long time.
When you came back, did you find there was a natural draw for you from your teaching position before you did the critical analysis to here? And
Oh yeah.
what was that magnet? What areas of Chautauqua were the magnet?
Opera, it's hard to come by. It was here. Theater, the lectures, loved the lectures. I always had to work in the summer. They stopped paying teachers in the summer, and the kids liked to eat anyway. So eventually I got a job writing the annual report at Chautauqua Institution for 9 years with the development office, so that was perfect.
This would have been during the 70s then?
A little later than that, yeah.
What was your take of Chautauqua then, and kind of as you've seen the evolution of the arts to today? What's
I like both. The thing about the old Chautauqua is it used to be where you came to do the arts, not where you came to watch the arts. It used to be you didn't have to sell the children to come in. If you parked along the highway, you could park for free. And the gates fees were very low, and the quality of the arts was not nearly as good. But many is the student I had who was thinking of going into the theater that I would send to the theater school over here, and they could work with professionals who would tell them quite frankly, you know, you have this talent and you don't have that talent. And it was a wonderful experience for a number of them. And to that extent, I valued it very much. Now, starting back with President Hess, it began to get better and more expensive, and less participatory, and more spectacular. And what it is now is very good. And a lot of people who think they know all about it don't. There are people in Jamestown who came here every year for 10 years, so they know what it's like, and they haven't been here in 20 years. And you say, well, no, you don't. But,
one of the services you provide, and a couple of weeks ago we had Jim Roselli here, and one of the services he provides is, in fact, taking the Chautauqua experience and trying to send that out to our community. Have we done, we being a community, Chautauqua community, let's say, done a good job in articulating that to the surrounding community? Or do we have really sort of a town and gown situation, the haves and have-nots?
oh, there's definitely a town and gown situation, definitely. There are a number of reasons, and I don't know them all. Chautauqua is forbidding to someone from Jamestown unless your parents brought you here and you know where everything is, and you know about, you have to keep your ticket in order to get out, and so on. You can have some very unhappy experiences coming here. You have to park in South Florida and walk. There isn't good public transportation. My kids and I tried to take the public bus once, and it took us 3 hours to get to Jamestown. Quite often, not so much anymore, but there was a period when basically the people working on the gates and so on were teenagers whose parents owned homes here. And their attitude is, you don't know where the amphitheater is, what kind of a loser are you? Which doesn't make people feel welcome. And in the community, people who are trying to get to work on time get behind somebody who's going 35 miles an hour and smelling the flowers and admiring the view. There's a certain amount of that, and people come in grocery stores, I've heard them, and get mad because you can't change a $100 bill. People in Jamestown don't tend to have $100 bills. There are some who do, of course, but that sort of friction, I think, is very real. Plus the fact the community is pretty conservative, and Chautauqua can come across pretty liberal, and that's an issue too.
Is there obviously we've described a gap, and I think it's certainly there are a few board members who are part of that world and trying to bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm.
Is there suggestions you would have for them to?
It isn't easy. You can't give up being what you are to make yourself more attractive to someone who isn't. Dealing with the handicapped is something I experienced. I had some foot surgery and had to use a handicapped parking space, and this past summer was miserable. One person wouldn't let you in, and the next person wouldn't let you out, and there aren't very many handicapped parking spots near the amphitheater or the opera house, and sometimes even though you have the handicapped sticker, they give you a ticket anyway. And it was a very unpleasant summer this past year because of that for me. And once I said, oh heck, I'll just walk from the far parking lot and tore my stitches out. So I punished myself for the stupidity of that. But when I was working in the development office, fought hard for which lane to get in, the signs, and they did put those up, and that helps a lot. People would come out, and all of a sudden you have to go somewhere, and there's cars behind you, and you seem like you would go to the red light and turn right, but you can't, and that's a little better than it was. I wish there was something better that could be done about parking. Very rarely, when you have to be somebody by a certain time, does the local transportation get you there. And if you have trouble walking, you're just not going.
As you've been watching the transitions of the symphony, the opera, the Friday night events, do you critique the Friday night events?
Not usually. For two reasons. One, the paper right now has a popular music and popular entertainment writer. When they don't, I do my best to cover everything. But the paper's policy is they don't review things unless they repeat, because they think the only reason you'd read a review would be to decide whether to go. And if there isn't another performance, you can't go. So they don't review the Friday things unless they repeat. Or if it's what they call newsworthy. If Sinatra had come out of retirement and decided to sing at the amphitheater, we'd have covered that. Yeah. But, so usually I don't cover Friday night.
As you've covered the opera, for example, over the last 30-some years, what have you noticed?
The productions have gotten better and better. It's kind of, it used to be, I mean, the Trishas were in charge of the opera here when the message from the administration was, put something on and don't spend a lot of money. And I can remember June Anderson, who became a great star at the Met, running on as the queen of the night, and supposed to be, you know, appearing in a cloud of smoke or something. She just sort of ran on the stage and wearing what looked like a Wicked Witch of the West costume. Oh my. On the other hand, sometimes you had some incredible experiences, like when June opened her mouth. It was fabulous. Now, of course, the young people program, the Trishas ran a beautiful program. They started it all, and it continued on through Cynthia and Linda and Jay. Jay does a really good job. It's hard to get people to learn a part, to sing it twice, to get paid to sing it twice. The fact that it's spread out, there's 2 this week, 2 performances of the same thing, and then nothing, and then 2 performances of something different. You go to Glimmerglass, you can see 4 operas in 3 days. You come here, if you want to see 4 operas, you have to stay 8 weeks. So people don't. It's also difficult. The rules of Norton Hall is they have to do it in English. And there are good arguments for singing in English. The problem with it is, well, there are 2 problems with it. One is it's difficult to get an opera singer of any success. You won't get Renee Fleming probably to learn a part in English because she'll probably never use it again. So it makes it harder for Jay to hire people. Also, composers, it matters to a singer what word you're saying, not just what sound you're making. To make an operatic sound, you need an open vowel, like a long O. And English, the largest vowel sound in English is a short E. And it's eh. And you go eh, and you sound like, you know, the dog howling at the moon. The consonant you put in front of that vowel sound, we have a lot of R's. And an R just cuts off your breath when you make it. So you say stretch, and yours going to sound awful. And they're going to say something like stretch. And it goes by so fast people don't notice especially. But there's a reason why operas are done in the language they're in. It's not just snobbery.
Do you agree with that, Bob? Do you agree with that as far as the operas?
I agree with that on 3 grounds. One, I cannot understand one thing they're singing in English. So why are you singing it if I, you know, and I do speak it sometimes. The second reason is what you said. I mean, it's really not pretty. I mean, it can be downright ugly. And the third reason is that the remaining Norton thinks it's an abysmal policy. So why not change it?
She can't change her uncles.
No, I know.
What are the that's kind of done by bequest, isn't it? I mean, isn't there some?
The Norton Foundation left the hall to Chautauqua on the condition that they only perform in English. And if they perform in another language, they lose the building.
Well, that wouldn't be so bad either.
Will I take the building away?
Yeah, we'll look at
Don't just take it away. Save a lot of money building a new one.
You know, it costs a lot of money to build a building and you use it 8 times
Yeah.
a year.
Look at the opera in the park.
Of course, I remember when they had 7 operas and 9 plays, all in Norton Hall in the same season. And, some miraculous stage crews practically killed themselves to make that possible.
Having covered it for the many years, are there 2, 3 opera performances you'd say those were terrific?
Performances?
Performances.
Sure. There were a lot.
You got time.
June Anderson is the Queen of the Night. She went on. If you've seen the movie Mozart, or Amadeus, about Mozart, the Queen of the Night appears sitting on the moon up in this big, that's June singing. It's not her that you see, but it's her voice. Let's see, Mignon Dunn as Carmen. She not only sang very well, but she was very sexy. Let's see, Brühl as Werther last summer, or 2 summers ago. People didn't like that opera because nothing happens in it. He loves the girl, she doesn't love him back, so he shoots himself, and it takes 3 hours. But he sang magnificently. I mean, it was thrilling. That comes to mind right away.
Those were performances by individual. What about performances, the particular operas themselves?
Production?
Productions.
Street Scene last year was very exciting. I really liked that. Let me think. There have been so many, it just all runs together after a while. Cynthia did a Regina, which she was just so proud of, and I didn't like it. But it was what it was. One of the hardest things for a critic is to separate between what you like and what's good. They're not the same thing necessarily. And it was very good, but I didn't like it.
How do you separate that? Man, talk about the logistics. You watch something. Are you taking notes when you're watching?
I take notes usually in music and very rarely in theater.
Yeah.
I don't know why exactly. And the kind of notes I take is I'll write, if I find a word or a phrase that sums something up very well, I'll write it down so I don't forget it by the time I get it 3 hours later in another site. I try, the most important thing for any writer is what goes on between you and your reader. And the majority of my readers are not very experienced in the arts. And so sometimes people say, oh, well, you don't even know that that was a tessitura. And I say, well, I did know it was a tessitura, but my readers mostly wouldn't, so I didn't use the word.
That was Jerry Hagelin, right?
No comment.
It was a great imitation.
I try to see things through the eyes of someone who has bought a ticket and come in to see it. If you've read 4 books and listened to 3 different recordings, you're not having the same experience as the people who will read your writing. And I'm not reading to spur Jay Lessinger into doing something different or to make some actor. I'm writing to teach and interest people in the Jamestown, New York about theater and opera and so on. So, I try to do enough background work so that I know what I'm talking about and I'm not shooting from the hip, but then I try to put that in the background and just react. Would this make me happy? Would this make me angry? Would this teach me anything? Are the people around me bored? I always try to take someone with me, and people always say, oh, you didn't bring your wife. Well, she comes when she wants to. She is a person, not joined to me at the hip, and if she doesn't want to come, she doesn't. And she has...
By the way, don't take it personal that she did not appear tonight with you. She did have a conflict.
She did indeed. She quite often will say something, boy, I was surprised by that. No, I was expecting it. Yeah, people will be surprised by that. You know, it helps when people were willing to be that open with me and put up with me not answering back. Because once I start tying myself into a point of view, then I'm not free to roam.
We've done the opera, let's talk about the theater.
Okay.
Give me the 3 performances that jump out.
Ooh, over the years, Equus. Probably the last time we had a nude scene here at Chautauqua.
Was that Cleveland?
It was Cleveland Playhouse, yeah. The Cradle Will Rock with Patti LuPone. That was a thrilling performance. The Glass Menagerie with Tom Hulse and Oscar winner. I know her name so well. Played Regina.
She did Amanda? She was Amanda or Laura?
She was Amanda. The role of Zan in The Little Foxes was written for Teresa Wright. I knew her name so well, and I couldn't say it. The Death of a Salesman, just recently, was a wonderful performance. Very, very good. Well, I could go on. This probably gives everybody a picture.
What's your preference? If you had one special night, that's, you know, of all the things you kind of cover as far as genres, what would you want to cover? Music, chamber music, theater, opera. What's your passion?
They're all my passion. If I absolutely had to shut all the others off and do one, it would be theater. I love good theater. But I also love good music, and I also love ballet. And
you do a lot of traveling. You go to New York, you go to Toronto,
I do my best.
Yeah. Is that something you and Ann like to do, or is that something you like to do?
Sometimes for different reasons we both like to. She enjoys it, but like I'll go to Stratford and we'll stay 4 days and I'll see 8 plays, sometimes 9. And that's more than she wants to see. And I'll thrill on Long Day's Journey in the Night, and that's too long and too depressing for her. So we have different tastes somewhat. If we go to New York, I'll try to do an interview in the morning and then a matinee and then dinner with somebody and then an evening, and that's not how she wants to spend her day in New York. But she certainly doesn't suffer.
You've covered a variety of those genres at a variety of these houses. And let's just talk a little bit about the area. The Fredonia Opera House, we have the Little Theater, we have the Reglenet, we have the Warren, the library. Talk about those, just the houses themselves.
It's wonderful that we have them. We have a great many really fine facilities. And I was listening to Sam Palladino talking about when he was young, there were 13 performing theater companies in Jamestown. And some of their theaters still exist, sometimes in very changed forms. And it is wonderful. As a performing space, the Reg, when they redid it, lost some of its acoustics. It's still a good house, but it's not. They had almost perfect acoustics, and it's not almost perfect anymore. It's just good. It's only good. Yeah. The thing about the Opera House and the Library Theater and the Seneca in Salamanca, they were completely done by volunteers. and the community owns those theaters because they built them with their own hands. And they feel different about it. The Reg was done professionally, and so that's their theater. And the community doesn't feel the same way about it. The Reg, when they started out, they sort of had the idea, and none of these local organizations, the Concert Association, Little Theater and so on, really knows what they're doing. So we'll take them over and do them right. And there was a lot of hostility and a lot of anger and a lot of, you know, if you don't do your performances here, we'll take our foundation's money away from you and give it, you know, over here instead. And Jamestown is still sort of healing from that. But they're not that way at all anymore. And they're really trying to be a community center, a civic center. And since we have a concert association that does classical music, they do other kinds of music. And there are people who say, well, if they don't do classical music, everybody has their own tastes and they're entitled to them. And, like I said before, you have to separate between what's good and what you like, because they're not the same thing. Automatically.
Along those lines, the support of the arts, certainly the public financing for the support of the arts, doesn't necessarily rise to the top of the priority list. Where do you
Always.
Where do you see this going in the next few years, especially given the downturn in the economics?
It's hard to say because you've got people trying to prime the economy, and sometimes when that happens, some of the best stuff comes. The WPA theater and so on is some of the best in our country's history. The fact that, I mean, Stratford and Shaw in Canada just cry bullets because they only get 6% of their funding from the government, and our theaters only get 2%. Europe does a whole lot better. It's very hard, and it's a two-way street. It's not just one-sided. People who don't benefit from the arts don't understand why they're important, and so they don't see why they should give money to them. And so often people in the arts think, if you're not cultured enough to know why we're important, or we don't want you around, well, that feeds itself. The arts need to reach out to people. Shakespeare was a hack. Anybody could go to his plays. He didn't keep them just for the Oxford elite. In fact, he got slammed pretty bad for not having gone to college himself. I've interviewed a lot of performing artists at Chautauqua over 25, 30 years that have said, oh, I don't even think of the audience, I just, think about my performance and so on. I'm sorry, I think that's a total mistake. If you're not communicating with and caring about your audience, they're not communicating with and caring about you. And so I think the arts need to open some new windows, and I think the culture, if you're a kid and you want to do something academic, you pay a big price in most of this nation. It's not cool. You see television show after television show talking about, that stuffy, that England always, they have a certain amount of things for people who like classical theater and classical music, and a certain amount of things for people who like Broadway style and jazz and that kind of thing, and a certain. We put everybody in competition with everybody, and so they all want to go to the least common denominator. And as soon as you get somebody who does a popular TV show, then 4 or 5 other networks want to do some version of that same show. instead of finding some land for themselves to grab onto. And we've just got to get past somehow the idea that if a team, last summer we had an orchestra in Jamestown that came from Sweden, and they had an audience of 700, and the paper ran the review on page 9 below the fold. If a team had come and competed and drawn 700 people, it would have been on page 1 with a photograph. That's a statement of values. And it is this nation's value. And what I've tried to do since I started writing was to bridge that gap, to tell people the things they need to know to enjoy what they see and hear better, and to tell people who do things how they were received, because they don't always know. And if they're any good, they care. So, Lord knows we're not always perfect with that, but we try.
So what do you think about the Steelers and the Cardinals?
Being born in Pittsburgh, I like to see the Steelers do really, really well.
Questions?
A number of ways. The best way of all is you can tell them you care. I can't tell you how many people say, oh, they really love the arts and there isn't enough about them. And I say, well, why don't you write a letter to the editor? Oh, I couldn't do that. Yeah, you could. If you write to a school board, they care that you've written to them. When I go to editorial meetings, I have been told many, many times, look, if we leave out a bowling banquet, we get 400 or 500 angry phone calls. If we leave out a symphony that attracts 700 people, nobody says anything. And it's because we've been taught, oh, it's indiscreet, I don't want to appear like a rabble-rouser. If you have an opinion, you need to express it, and if you don't, the world passes you by. Write to school boards, because school boards don't like to get written to. When a program at a school sounds like they're going the right way, write them a letter of praise, because they think nobody cares. I know, because I've been doing it for over 30 years. If you don't compete, you won't win. And this stuff matters, and so it needs to compete. My column appears on the back of the arts calendar. This is the Dunkirk paper. Where these drawings are in the Jamestown paper is the arts calendar for the coming week, and it will be there.
And the school events would be there?
Right. Because for a number of years, I have a section at the bottom of my column called Winks. The column is called The Critical Eye, and at the bottom we have Winks. And little 1 and 2 paragraph notices of there are auditions for this, and you can attend that, and there's a concert here, and so on. It said the same thing that was on the back of the same page. And so we decided the sensible thing was I would write out of Jamestown, and they would do Jamestown in the calendar. So there are people who are mad at me. You've never written about Little Theater once in your Winks. And no, I never will. Because it's on the back of the same piece of paper. It's sort of a waste of space. When I was in the development office, I used to talk with the people who were in charge about it and put my ideas in on a regular basis and so on. Most of the performing arts organizations are very in favor of that. Theater wasn't at the time, but they have gotten vastly easier to deal with. They told me they were a conservatory and they didn't care if anybody came to the performances.
You wouldn't hear that now.
No, you won't hear that now. Ooh. It wasn't classically wonderful, but the Pines of Rome last summer was absolutely thrilling. That was a very good performance. 2 or 3 years ago, the Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony
Yes.
with Jared Jacobson, that was wonderful. Gosh, the Great Big Beethoven's Ninth. There was a period when it was the largest community theater in New York State. 1 out of every 10 people in Jamestown belonged to Little Theater.
Wow.
Seasoned members of Little Theater. And it's changed a great deal. And I have a great vision for Little Theater. I think it could be wonderful. It's not bad. Anytime I try to say in print they could be wonderful, I get 5 angry letters from, don't criticize them, they're fine. You know, I understand. They're okay. But they could be wonderful. And I'd love to see them do that. Now, the Little Theater Jamestown was professionally directed until about 20 years ago. They have a huge building. I don't know if you've ever toured the building. There is an entire second theater upstairs. And above that, the tiles, there is like the Civic Center, all the curlicues and the balconies and the domes and the so on from the old Shays. They used to be Shays Jamestown. They have an entire dance studio below the stage. They have a green room which is the same size as the stage. They have costume storage. They have costumes from Gone with the Wind, which Lucille bought at auction and gave to them. Last time I remember seeing them was when they did Showboat. They have a wonderful thing. I think that building is a wonderful thing that it hangs around their neck because it costs a fortune. And they have to make enough money to keep it operating. And they're afraid to do something unpopular. Or, I guess afraid is a bad choice of words. They're unwilling to do something unpopular. Because if they don't sell any tickets, they have to heat the building anyway, and they have all the repairs and everything to deal with. I'm glad I'm not in charge of them, because I want everything in the world for them, and I'm probably too direct to get it. Little Theater started out in what's now Bridgeota's Market. And it was a Howard Johnson's. And it was started by a married couple who were actors with the Cleveland Playhouse and came to Chautauqua every year and liked the area and decided that they would leave Cleveland and stay here. Their first season, they did 18 productions in 1 year.
What year would that have been?
Ooh, 36. That's a guess, but it's close to that. They eventually got to where they did their rehearsing and they made their sets at the Howard Johnson's, and they took them to the Kappa Theater. And they worked entirely with painted drops because there's no wing space to speak of or fly space or anything. And they did that for a long time. And then when Shays gave up their theater, Little Theater acquired it. And they get a lot of help from the community, like they get the community heat. And that's a very useful thing, especially in a large building and so on. And so they moved there. Dick Corbin, at the time, Little Theater wouldn't do any musicals. So Dick Corbin, who loved musical theater and so on, moved into the theater. By that time, the Masons had taken it over, and it was the Scottish Rite Consistory. I don't know if they let him use it or he rented it. I don't really know what his deal with them was, but he did everything on a shoestring, so he called his group the Shoestring Players. and they did earnest, good community theater. And he just reached the point where earning a living and donating all that time didn't work together. You had to do one or the other, and his family liked to eat and live in a home and so on, so he gave it up. By that time, Little Theater had found that musicals were a cash cow and that Americans loved musical theater and would buy tickets to them, and so they had started doing them. But not long after they did that, they stopped hiring professional directors. And the local directors are good amateur directors. I don't mean to say anything against them, except that they are the same people, and so you tend to see the same production over and over and over in slightly different forms. There are hundreds of thousands, and so narrowing it to 5 is a challenge. Julia Lovett. I don't know if any of you were here when Julia Lovett was here, but Julia was a community outreach person for Chautauqua. And she sang in every barn and every Sunday school class and every Grange Hall in the county, and everybody loved her. And people came to see her because it was her. And more people came through the gate for opera than for any other thing in that period. And Julia is still performing and is still teaching, and she could make you love the sound of a screwdriver on a sharpening plane. Julia. Cynthia. Cynthia and I went the whole time she was the director of the opera, but by heck, I learned a lot about everything.
What was your last name?
Cynthia Arbach. I still donate every year to the Cynthia Arbach Fund in Chautauqua. And she'd say, well, Robert, I don't know why you think you know so much about Harriet Warren. Harriet Warren was the wife of the couple that went from the Cleveland Playhouse to start Little Theater. And I travel a lot with old ladies. They know a lot, they're free, they can afford it, and nobody talks. When Anne can't go to something, I have a number of older ladies whom I invite to go, and Harriet would go into a theater and sit down, and before the play began, she'd say, well, they've hung a lot of color, and so my guess is they're going to go for a very realistic production, but they're going to try and tilt it in, and she was always right. She would say things about performances that opened my eyes. In fact, Stratford did A Death of a Salesman, and when it was over, Harriet said, well, I love the way they did it, but she said, if you were married to that woman, you'd be a failure too. This woman sat there and enabled Willie Loman. She made it possible for him to dream and not to work, and yes, Harriet. Beverly Sills. Beverly used to take my Western culture class backstage. I used to take them to New York City every year on a field trip and show them around and show them how the hydraulics on the stage worked and introduce them to everybody. And then she would take them out on the stage and she would pull back the curtain and there would be the theater stretching away, and now this is opera, she would say. And Beverly was over 6 feet tall. She was an enormous woman. And yeah, definitely. And who else? Martha Henry. Martha Henry is in charge of the training program at Stratford, and she beats all those young Canadians into classical actors. And I'm sure she does beat them, although I've never seen her do it. But they come out really, really good. I saw her in a production of Long Day's Journey as the drug-addicted mother, and she stood in the aisle of the Tom Patterson Theater, and her hands are supposedly rheumatic, and she held them oddly and so on, and she talked about she was so alone in the world, and I had to hold on to the arms of my seats not to go up and take her in my arms and hold her, which she probably would have killed me. But I believed everything she said. I believed that minute, and I've seen it 30 times. But when she did it, I believed it. And that's just right off the top of my head. And there are lots more people.
We could go on forever, Bob. This is a hoot. First of all, thank you. And this has been just a terrific opportunity to get to know a little bit about Bob Plyler and what makes you tick. Thank you.
Thank you.